Well, hello there. This is Shane from Shane's Reviews, and I hope you are having a great day today. Today, we're going to be talking about a book from Marko Kloos. I hope I'm saying that right. It's Kloos. And the name of the book is Centers of Gravity, which is Frontlines Book 8, and it was narrated by Eric G. Dove. So, first things first. This, I think, is probably a wrap-up book. I think this might be the last of the series. If it's not, I'll be very surprised because it is a great place for it to stop. And sometimes authors will do something like that, and it's wonderful. Sometimes authors will skip over something like that and just continue going. And then it gets pretty hard to take because you'll have characters that seem like knockoffs of the originals or whatever. I've actually encountered that several times in several different places. And it's not a fan favorite for me when that happens. But we have had a 8-book series where it starts out with Andrew Grayson going to boot camp, trying to get away from the PRC, which is kind of a government-controlled public housing network setup. And it's a horrible situation for everybody involved. And this is actually a pretty heavy component of the series in the beginning, and is mentioned throughout the entirety of the series from point to point. But on the same token, once the Linkies show up, then everything kind of gets reprioritized. And what I mean by that is humanity actually finally comes together in a lot of ways, but it doesn't get rid of the PRCs. It doesn't fix everything. It just means that more people are inclined to work together than they were before. So there's that. Now, whenever it first starts out, like I said, he was trying to get out of the PRCs, and his father was the main component of that because he really didn't like his dad. His dad was really a not great example of fatherhood, to the point of which all of their encounters are kind of like gaslight, where he'll give one piece of information for a response and then yank that rug out from underneath Andrew, his son, and leave him feeling voided or empty or etc. And that's just no way to go about it. So I can't really say I blame him for wanting to get out of that situation, because if he hadn't have joined up with the military in the way that he did, he probably would have been stuck in the same old from day to day and never really had a chance to make something of himself. So it's been a pleasure watching Andrew as he's grown from a teenager that's just joined into the military to someone that ends up being a network engineer and then a combat controller and grunt and etc. And the way that he rises up through the ranks, it's subtle. So as far as it being like a military type drama, a sci-fi military drama, I should clarify, it's actually a really good read all the way through, and all of the works together is so much more than just reading the first book, of course. But it's one of those things that sometimes I get into a series and it's just, I stick with it because of familiarity. But with this, every time that our good man Marko comes out with a book, usually I'll pre-order it as soon as I see it pop up. Like this one, I had it pre-ordered, I think, a month and a half ago. And I've been very patiently waiting for it to come out. And now that it's out and I've read it and I've listened to it again, I absolutely adore this book. And it's because of that send-off, really. So what can I tell you about the story that's in front of us? Because there's actually a chapter at the very end of the book that's called Centers of Gravity. And I like the way that he went about that, because it starts to pull everything together. And there's all these like hopes and aspirations and dreams that Andrew and his wife Haley have had since about the third to halfway mark. I can't remember what book they got married in, but it was very helter-skelter in the way that they did it, and they have actually stuck to it because she's in the military as well. She's a pilot, and she's a really good pilot, and so sometimes they ended up being deployed together, sometimes not. But you see some of the stress of if you were in the military or a military spouse, how that could and would and will affect a relationship. But thankfully, these two are really bonded well together. And that's been one of the hallmarks for me of this series. Is it seems like every time that Andrew is given an opportunity to do something, not to drop any names, but a dirty secret favorite book of mine, James McGill, but he will take any opportunity he can to have sex in any capacity that he can, it seems like. But Andrew Grayson is a completely different character. His morality, his compass, everything is dedicated to his end goal of just spending the rest of his life with his wife. And this has been like an ongoing theme throughout the book. They both wanted to jump out of the military just pretty much as soon as they could, but they knew that if they did, then they really wouldn't have a leg to stand on whenever it comes to the finances, because inflation and everything is so far out of control that you would have to work almost 4 or 5 lifetimes in order to have a life like suburban middle-class people would these days. And so it points out the disparity. It points out the unfairness in some ways, but in the same token, even though it's unfair, it's a reality. So there's that. Now, this book, there's a formula that I've gotten used to whenever it comes to these books, and this one kind of didn't adhere to that, which was great. They were in space, they were picking a fight, they were doing some reconnaissance, etc. But the meat and bones of the book it's gotten dire, and if we don't get a leg up very soon in that universe, then that's pretty well going to be it. And so they ended up accidentally hitching a ride with a Linky seed ship whenever it jumps from point A to point B, end up in a place that they don't know about, do some reconnaissance because they think that might be the home area for the seed ships and for the Linkies, where they all came from. And we don't really get any resolution on, hey, it's going to be all right, with the exception of at the end of the book. At the end of the book, there's some information that you get that kind of makes you think they will be able to. And if he's gone that direction with this, where it's more of a leave it to the reader's imagination on what it is that's going to happen or could happen, or the final ports of the story, that would be really neat. Very few times has that happened or will happen that I'm like, yay! Because there's always that one question I've got that always seems like it never gets answered. And Orson Scott Card is certainly one that does that to me all the time, because he'll expound on things. He'll give you more and more and more details about something, but never really answer the question that was asked, which is a thing. It just happens. But anyway, I digress again. So the way that everything kind of comes together, I don't want to tell you a whole lot, because if I do and you've been reading this, you're going to tell me I'm a jerk for ruining it for you. But there's so many good things that happen for Andrew and for Haley. Not to mention the way that Andrew just gets beaten down horribly. But thankfully, he's got some good teammates with him that drag his rear end, even though they should have left him behind in the condition that he was in. They drag him out and getting back to where he's on, I think it was the Washington. And so, with his body completely wrecked, skull crushed, eye socket not working, all these sorts of things. I find it amazing that even at that point, he was still so concerned about his fellow teammates, his fellow special ops, the potheads, that he suffered through what he did to make sure that if he was needed, he could at least give pointers or whatever, because they certainly weren't going to let him back into normal operations after all those injuries. And it was a good way for him to have an out, because statistically speaking, it doesn't work that way for the most part. It's good that he wasn't killed. And I don't want to sound really mean whenever I say it this way, but this way is awesome compared to the author finally going, you know what? This character's done. It's time for him to die. Even though he's got 8 books. it's time for him to go away. So, cave in, dead, done. I'm glad that didn't happen that way. But there's some books that I've read where I wish it had happened that way, because we wouldn't have drug on for another 4 or 6 books on a series that, in my mind, had died at that point. So, I mean, whatever. And it also falls down to not every book is every person's cup of tea, even if it's from a favorite author. That's the way that it is. Anyhow, so I've got to ask the question, is this book worth your time, efforts, and energies? If you've never read any of the Frontline series before, I would not start here, because it's not really going to do it for you. I don't think this would be a very good standalone book. But if you have read some of them before and you want to see how it should end, this is the one for you for sure. So yes, it is worth your time, efforts, and energies. As far as like the emotional side of things, what did it get out of me? Or did it get anything from me? It did. I was relieved. I was anxious. I enjoyed seeing the interplays. I also liked the real lifeness that was given to the story by Marko in this, because he didn't have to put that kind of detail in. He didn't have to try to give that kind of closure. He didn't have to try to wrap the story up in a way of which, if that was the last book, then there's some good meat for people to get. And it was certainly a page turner. As I was listening to it, I found that more and more I was farther along in the story than I thought that I was, and I only had X amount of time left, and I was like, oh no. So I have gone back and started reading it a second time at this point, and I'm glad that I am, because it's not like I've missed much of any of the details. But on the same token, this is one that I'll probably go back to a couple of times before I'm done with it. So that should tell you something, right? Anyway, with that being said, the question of the week. I think I've asked this one before, but let's say that a giant ship just showed up, fell to the ground, caused a cataclysmic event, much like the dinosaurs would have seen whenever the kinetic strike hit. And then these huge dinosaur-looking things come out and start gassing every bit of life and trying to terraform the planet. What do you do? Do you just accept it? Or do you run up like a caveman with a spear and then get stepped on? Do you try to join up with the military? Or do you just fight the good fight until it's done? Personally, I think what I would do is, since I know the time would be short, I'd probably go get a couple tents, get a couple hammocks, go find a nice little river/lake spot, and chill there with my family until the inevitable came around. Because it would. The way that they destroy a planet, they do it very quickly. But I'm curious to see what you would do, because at least I know that I would want that peace and just try to have a little bit of joy before the end. Because as me, being one person, there's not a whole lot that I could do in that situation. And the way the books are set up, it takes armies to take these things down. So I wouldn't be much good in that one. But I would at least try to enjoy the rest of what I had. And I'm curious to see what you guys and gals think. What would you do? Tell me down there in the comment section. I would absolutely love to know for sure. And if you've made it this far, you are my hero. I'm not sure which one of these videos that is coming in that you would pick. But if you happen to pick that one up there, I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.